When I think about it, most of the games I tend to play are based around loot. Days of playtime spread across a lifetime chasing digital goodies and perks that would ultimately make me the biggest badass in all the realm or something like that. And I know, for some my time played looks like rookie numbers. But I mean it when I say I love these games. At the very least, I love the idea of them. While I'm not an expert in all the games mentioned, I think I've done enough to formulate an opinion. I've done raids blind on Destiny, I've gotten cutting edge a few times on WoW, and I've smashed my brains into the wall that is Paragon levels in Diablo. Every time the climb has felt better in the moment than when I look back in retrospect. There is certainly a level of satisfaction to completing the game. All WoW raid tiers are a great example of this. But as time goes on, I feel like the idea of completing the game, even for a short while, is going away. The more I play and take on a grind, I find myself at the end always wondering, why didn't this experience live up to what I imagined? Some say love is about loving someone in their entirety, flaws and all. I think for some games at least, we love them enough to scream their flaws from the rooftops, because unlike people, they can actually be changed. This video will explore that very phenomenon. Why do we love these games that make us feel empty at the end? Undeniably, people like collecting things. Stamps, plates, and for some even battle pets. Crazy, I know. This hoarding behavior has a lot to it, but my personal favorite is another wacky Freudian theory where he compares our love for collecting things, particularly gold, with the need to reclaim our own feces. Kinda makes sense if you think about it, since half the time my drops are absolute shit.
The fuck is that?
At a core level, I think a truly brilliant game actively makes you want to play it. For me at least, I remember rushing home from school to play video games or eagerly awaiting the new drop of a WoW expansion.
I have a girl in RL, everyone, I swear!
But being excited to take part in something that everyone around you is also experiencing at the same time is truly special.
What about a pandemic?
Now for this video, I'll be more so commenting on persistent worlds, where players can play with one another so gear actually feels meaningful. These are otherwise known as Games as a Service, or GAS, which is probably the single worst acronym since Transport Workers and Totliner Services. For better or worse, Games as a Service makes you a slave to the developers. The world and the systems you love are doomed for constant change, whether in an effort to keep players engaged or for other reasons. Don't think about it too much. Sometimes a lot of players will feel disenfranchised, as if the game is no longer made for them, with their wishes and prayers going unanswered, as if their faith persists through the spite they hold for their pagan gods. But before we jump into the major criticism, we need to establish what a gameplay loop actually means. All great games adhere to some basic principles. While a lot of this may seem like common sense, there is a formula to what makes a video game unique when compared to other media like books or movies. It's the interactive nature of games that differentiate them, and makes them fun. Janet Murray, professor at Georgia Tech, describes agency as the satisfying power to take meaningful action and see the results of our decisions and choices. While she quickly points out the limitations in writing and programming, at a core level, loot-based games take advantage of player agency to make them feel like you're making meaningful choices. No, wait. I know for some people, that phrase might send you into a fit of rage.
Meaningful choice. Meaningful choice.
But trust me, we'll get back to that later. From a design perspective, making choices about what gear you use is important. When you find a new piece of gear or loot and you ask yourself, hey, is this sword better than my current sword? Or hey, is this pair of assless chaps a 0.2% DPS increase? You know, for my OR peers out there. I got you boys, don't worry. Okay, so we have our agency. Our players can make choices. Now we actually have to give them something to make choices about. Enter
progression systems.
Progression can exist in many ways. In roguelike games, you unlock new abilities to take on new challenges. In RPGs, you unlock new game plus. But we'll be focusing mainly on power and difficulty progression. That eternal carrot on the end of the stick that always seems to be just out of reach. Now, the content of progression at this stage doesn't really matter. Most of the games we're looking at will scale linearly with difficulty, with gear offsetting it now and then to spice things up. An example of this would be raid tiers in WoW. You have 4 raid tiers, looking for raid, normal, heroic, and mythic. And then they all get easier as you climb with gear. But with so many systems going on, you can get gear in different places and it gets messy, so we'll just kind of look at this in a simple way. As the years have gone by, a lot of these games will have multiple progression systems that all kind of work together towards this common goal of defeating difficult content. This in turn rewards all of these systems internally. Getting into too many systems is a whole other topic, but it's something to note. These games are getting more complicated and these gameplay loops are getting harder to work with. Either way, all of this together creates something called a state of flow. Now, flow is a topic worthy of its entire video also, but simply put, Flow is the optimal experience where nothing else matters. It's a state where action seems to be entirely out of conscious awareness. You're pretty much on autopilot, you're in your grind, you know what you're doing. Simply put, it's that feeling when you're hitting your stride in a game, your rotation is down or your aim is on, you're killing that final boss and you're completely in the zone. It's muscle memory, it's knowing exactly what to do in the situation, and it's that point where you really know you understand what you're doing. This is what makes these games feel so addicting. This loop makes you stronger, and if you look back, you'll see how far you've come. And I'll reiterate again, I do enjoy these titles. I play them a ton. It's just sometimes I have to wonder, is this fun? Or is this a habit? So we've established why people get invested in these games, and now we have to look at why they make us feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Positive psychology looks at the science of what makes us happy. According to Harvard Medical School, a key part of this is active engagement. Remember when we spoke about flow before? Well, the state of flow is actively linked to feeling satisfied. Not just in games, but across all content. In studies by Ellen J. Langer, she found that skill challenges were much more likely to create that satisfaction than passive ones such as watching TV. When the activity becomes less challenging, our level of flow will decrease, and then so will our level of satisfaction. I don't think it's a stretch to assume players in loot-based games who end up outgearing the content feel a sense of boredom, but it's good to have it backed by research. I could even go out on a limb and say a lot of newer players who don't really get into the meat of endgame drop off for this reason. When a player gets to the endgame, they do the content that they think they're able for. In some cases, they'll massively outgear it because the devs don't want to give a poor first experience of endgame, and then they'll get bored since they might feel like they don't have the time or the ambition to venture further. This is just my speculation, but things like looking for raid tool in WoW, grinding super easy strikes in Destiny, and lower rifts in Diablo reflect this. A large set of people peak at these entry-level challenges and then drop off once it feels trivial. Another aspect of satisfaction is achieving progress. All of these games do an amazing job of setting you numerous small tasks that all go towards achieving long-term goals. Now, goal setting is also a commonly used treatment for depression and other disorders. It actively makes our brains react. Completing small tasks gives you a spike of dopamine, and you'll naturally want to chase this spike again. This is the reality of how we form habits, and quest systems are designed around this undeniable fact. There's a reason why gamifying your life is a way many people get over procrastination, because games are fun, and small bite-sized tasks make it easier to achieve things. It's also widely accepted that humans are deeply social creatures. A lot of these games offer a sense of being involved, whether it's in a large thriving world or a part of an ongoing event such as a season ladder. Social inclusion is such a deep required aspect of our lives, and undeniably being able to get involved without being excluded is a hallmark of these games. I mean, unless you're an off-meta scrub, then everyone hates you. While not exactly a loot-based game, we can see the effectiveness of an in-game concurrent event in the mega title that is Fortnite. These events from an engagement and marketing angle have been used as case studies on how to do this correctly. Twitter even has them listed on their marketing blog as an example of how to do it right. Now, of course, there's crazy amounts of ad spend involved here, but at the core, these things get players hyped and more likely to be engaged. And engagement is more important than you might think. In fact, I'd wager in the industry right now, it's the single most important metric for success. In recent years, you've probably heard a thing or two about these little old things called loot boxes. They've been mentioned once or twice. Now, I'm not going to discuss them too much in this video, but a key part of the argument brought up about these microtransactions are how they provide the same feeling as gambling, and thus are quite predatory, especially to a younger audience. Well, this is undoubtedly true. Here's the thing. If you apply the same mechanics that loot boxes do, but instead of money, you use, player engagement or time, you're guaranteeing a high-value customer. According to DLC sales and subscription numbers, this is a net positive, right? Players are playing more, they're buying the new products. Hey, pack it in, boys, we sell video games.
Good job, guys.
But is high engagement directly correlated to good game design? Well, I'd argue no. No, it isn't.
No!
For companies, engagement is measured in logins and time played. Now, this is an oversimplification. Data analysis is a huge field, but generally, the single metric you see used is monthly active users, especially for games as a service. But meaningful gameplay engagement is something else entirely, and this lack of distinction between the two is worrying. Have you ever noticed how these games sometimes time-gate content under the veil of, well, we don't want players to burn out or to be content-starved? World of Warcraft does it, Destiny does it. When there's a story unfolding in a concurrent world, they tend to space it out so players don't rush to the end. There is a story beat reason for doing this, but it also sometimes seems a bit sus. In the ongoing games as a service world, keeping players playing over long periods of time is key. Taking a look at Activision Blizzard's quarterly earnings reports, the two key focus points are revenue and monthly active users across all of their franchises. Engagement is king in the always online economy, and it makes sense. Higher engagement directly correlates to more spending, especially if there's an in-game shop, for example. In recent years, as microtransactions have become more mainstream, subtly in the background, so has the rise of unpredictable rewards, the dreaded RNG. When looking at addictive behaviors, psychologists call it variable rate reinforcement. PC Gamer did a great article on addictive gaming psychology, where they quoted a Dr. Luke Clark, who's the director of the Center of Gambling Research at the University of British Columbia. He states, "The player is basically working for reward by making a series of responses, but the rewards are delivered unpredictably. Dopamine cells are the most active when there is maximum uncertainty, and the dopamine system responds more to an uncertain reward than the same reward delivered on a predictable basis." Dopamine is, of course, key to creating habits, as we mentioned earlier. Another way to view all this is to look at B.F. Skinner's conditioning experiments. While almost a meme at this point, the Skinner box is a small chamber where rats could pull a lever to get food and also not get shocked. While not natural behavior for rats, they quickly learned what to do. So as long as we all in these games just keep pulling that lever like a good old boy and farm our weekly rewards, we'll be okay, right? It would be disingenuous to say that everyone experiences the same game. Everyone has individual engagements with these products, and they can be defined by any number of things. I still regard a lot of old games many would think are trash as the greatest, simply because I made friends on them, or had amazing experiences at the same time. A key thing to note, however, is that although everyone has a different experience, diminishing returns will eventually hit everyone. Too much of a good thing can become sour over time, and that's just natural. That being said, avoiding things like burnout in ongoing games is key, especially from a design perspective. At this point, I thought it'd be best to reach out to a few people to get their take. I got talking to Tarkakat, a long-time content creator in the Path of Exile community, who specifically creates builds and hosts the largest community podcast for the game on Twitch. We sat down to talk about Burnout, and how design shifts seem to be affecting games as a whole.
The way that Path of Exile works when I'm watching this is every 3 months they launch a new league, the entire ladder resets, everything starts again from scratch, and there'll be some extra new mechanics added for it. I used to be able to stream all 3 months of the league very happily, but just with where Path of Exile's at currently and just like where the world's at, it's become a lot harder to maintain that full 3-month period. When it comes to designing, you know, there'll be people who want the more social elements, there are people who want the more like completionist stuff, the explorers, but basically, a really good league, like a well fleshed out league, is something where the people who, over that 3-month period, maybe they only play for a week, 2 weeks, a couple of hours a day, they're having fun. But the people who want to log in every single day can still find something fun and achievable. And one of the things that I find so fun about loot-based games is normally you can't guarantee what loot you get. You kind of got to like make do. And that kind of like hodgepodge approach of, I'm just having to make this work. That's what I find really fun. A lot of these games seem to really struggle with the gameplay loop. It's like, oh, you kill stuff to get loot. It's like, okay, but why am I getting loot? So you can kill stuff better. And it's like, yeah, but like, what's my end journey? To get the best loot. And it's like, yeah, but like, why am I doing it? And a lot of the times the items just aren't interesting. And that's one thing that Path of Exile does really well, is it has very interesting items. I feel like a lot of these games are built on that prestige of seeing that person and like, oh, I wish I could one day be that guy with the really cool item. One of my most vivid memories of playing Diablo 3, there was a exploit, or rather a clever use of game mechanics, where particular zones would have chests spawn in set locations. And people realized there was one zone that you could waypoint into, and there was a chest right next to the waypoint. and you would just click the waypoint, open the chest, pick up the loot, restart. It was boring as all hell, but it was the best way to get legendaries at the time. Not everyone, but that's how a very big portion of the player base did it, and they burned themselves the hell out. And it's like, oh, I finally got this amazing bow, but I am so bored of this game now, I never want to do it again. That's the big issue having grind. Games which have an artificial grind put in there. I often feel like a lot of games would be much better if they were more linear and you just trimmed like 10 hours off everything.
Systems designed, even if not intentionally so, need to not artificially bloat the game. If a grind doesn't have a fun loop, direct purpose, or a meaningful reward, I think it's worth being scrapped. This chat on the lack of purpose in design led me to Sam, the solo developer of an early access ARPG known as Sanctum Breach. Sam approaches design in a very methodical way. Being the only developer, he's restarted his game numerous times to get it right. We sat down to chat about design as a concept and his takes on the topics we've discussed so far in the video.
I was a bit bored of everything that was around, and I felt like there were a lot of things that could be done differently, especially regarding endgame. When I went to uni and started game design, I was just like, I always had it in my head that I'd make an ARPG. Been developing games for about 4 years now. This is my first like proper game, Sanctum Breach. It's a hardcore endgame focused ARPG. But I think the biggest issue that a lot of companies run into, and this just becomes more of an issue the bigger you get, is target audience. So for the big companies, they're forced to try and target as many players as possible because of publishers. If you can reduce your target audience and just have one specific player in mind, then I think you can tailor everything to that individual. And obviously that's something that big companies can't do, and I think that's why they feel so bloated and there's so much unnecessary sort of content. I think dailies are a big part of it, really. It was the first sort of introduction to the idea of forcing you to come back to a game in order to progress, rather than just allowing you to play at your own pace. You get like releases when you complete your dailies, and it's just sort of like that sort of progression that people otherwise might not have. It's kind of like the mobile gaming approach. You allow the player to have a little bit so they get addicted and they want to progress, they want to carry on, but then you gate it. It's not always behind money, like it's behind other things as well. There's not as much freedom as there used to be in gaming. It's quite restricting a lot of the time. In terms of it affecting design, it depends who you are as a developer. It depends if you have a publisher. It depends like who your target audience is. And it's a good way to make money. It just preys on people's addiction. A lot of games nowadays, the loot that you get isn't always exciting. I feel like it's okay to have those like ridiculously strong uniques or those broken legendaries. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if you balance the game around knowing that you've got these really powerful items, then it's fun for the player when they find them. Keeping in your head what's fun from a player perspective, that's finding cool items. Make broken items, it's okay. I want to stay true to my target audience. Like, I am making a hardcore game and I never want to stray from that, no matter what happens. I feel like when you stray, that's when things start to go bad. Like, you just need to accept that not every single person is going to like your game. I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind.
A core theme from my chat with Sam was this idea of audience. Who is playing the game and who is it made for? The more I thought about this, the more I found that the curse of these AAA titles really is trying to please everyone. Live service games like World of Warcraft just couldn't be created by an indie studio, and by their very nature, MMOs need to have a massive amounts of infrastructure and developers. To sustain a revenue stream, these games have to cast a wide net, and an unsatisfying gameplay loop for some may be a symptom of this. Back at the start of the video, I mentioned loving something enough to want to see it improve, and it's this limbo between love and disdain that can be seen in a lot of feedback for live service blockbusters. Right now, a key phrase in the WoW community is #PullTheRipcord, as many experienced players are trying to save the wider community from an unfun gameplay loop once the new expansion Shadowlands arrives. I think this is a perfect illustration of how frustration can come from enjoying something so much. On the Pull the Ripcord discussion, there's people on all sides, and again this reinforces audiences that get mixed cause conflict. Overall, it seems that the most fun I and many others have had in these games isn't the journey, It's a bit cliche to reduce it all down to the friends we made along the way, but it really does seem the process outweighs the power fantasy at the end. This just reinforces that good gameplay trumps all, and lazy time investment barriers ultimately burn people out. That being said, there is a subset of people who, despite this, will devote massive amounts of time because that's just what they do. And hey, games are subjective, but even the most experienced will be trying to make things better as a whole, so I guess it doesn't really matter. The idea of having to go through these unfun systems shouldn't be the default, and that's something everyone can agree on. When looking at solutions to the problems we've discussed, it really comes down to a single design philosophy. Trim the fat. Some resistance is good, sure, but making games into bloated versions of themselves just dilutes the magic that they may have had at their core. And if there's one takeaway I want people to have from this video, it's that monthly active users shouldn't be the only measurement of a good game. It's just another data point, another indicator, but not the whole picture. All this being said, I am hopeful. Every year, developers at massive studios are interacting more with their communities. What was once almost a doomed approach has now become the norm, with community figures rising up to bring their concerns to the devs. At the end of the day, most of these developers specifically take a lower salary to work in the industry that they care about. Game developer salaries are probably less than most software engineering jobs in the Valley. They want to make a good product, even if the market environment strains that. Also, with the rise of independent developers taking strides to make unique experiences that big studios couldn't really take a risk on, there is a lot to look forward to. And through all this, I am well aware I'll probably sink another 50 days into Shadowlands when it comes out, and I'll probably invest thousands more hours into all of these games over the next year or so. I just hope that, with time, live service games will continue to design with fun gameplay in mind. And not just for earnings reports.